Hey everyone, happy Friday, happy weekend. Hope everyone is doing well. This is a quick sketch of some boats at the pier that I drew from some reference photos I found on a Facebook group that I recently joined. It's free reference images for artists submitted by photographers. So the photographers share their photos and then the artists share their paintings, drawings, whatever. And they're royalty free, so the artists can do whatever they want with them. Now that I'm going back to look for the photographer's name, I can't find it, but I'll add it to the comments when I do. I'm using a Faber-Castell Pitt dual marker for this red color, and my Kaweco Student 70s Soul fountain pen with Aurora black ink for the line work. I use a black Pentel brush pen to fill in some dark areas, and a cool gray Tombow dual brush pen for some quick shading at the end. So for the reference images I used, there wasn't any one photo from that set that looks like what I'm drawing exactly. So I'm using different boats and birds and angles from different images and combining them, kind of bouncing back and forth from different photos in that post and creating a new composition. What I liked about doing this drawing was all these crazy fishing boat devices and details. I guess they're like outriggers and nets and fishing lines and floats. So just this mess of things shooting up from the boats. So I kind of started just making a lot of this stuff up after the first boat that I drew. You kind of get the idea. It's just straight vertical lines with shorter horizontal lines and then some long ropey lines coming off of them. So I didn't need to stick to the references too closely. I think this is a good example of an image that is largely constructed with design principles in a way, or the success of the piece kind of hinges on some design considerations more so than an accurate rendering of what's in the image, if that makes sense. In other words, other than some pretty basic perspective on the boats themselves where the hulls and the cabins are, the rest is just lines. And you could look at it like forget that you can recognize that they're boats. If you don't even know what you're looking at, then the drawing is still capable of being either pleasing or not pleasing, just based on an arrangement of shapes, right? So that's where I'm able to, if I'm successful there, then I'm maybe benefiting from my graphic design education, but it's actually simple stuff like avoiding tangents where two shapes are touching or too close together, leaving a good balance of white space between and around elements, things like that, and recognizing where contrast can play into it. And there's so many different types of contrast that can work into a drawing. So, for example, one application of contrast is not just dark and light contrast, but contrast in shapes and lines. So I'm going for not really thinking about it much, but I'm leaning into that contrast of straight lines for the poles and then the swoopy lines of the ropes and nets and stuff. And all those things intersect and hinge on one another. This is why I also love urban drawings where you have power lines and telephone cables kind of strewn around the environment. It's another contrasting element that sort of interrupts or counterbalances the rigidity of the buildings. The same way nature kind of counterbalances human-made structures. You have like the trees and bushes and rocks. That's all chaos. So you have that element of chaos, and when it's juxtaposed with the rigid, boxy buildings, then there's a relationship that happens, and relationships contribute to an image being appealing or not. So, and again, this is just a quick sketch. I don't know how successful I am here in achieving great balance and design, but it is what makes this fun to draw, I think, because essentially on their own, these are not really fun things. These sort of intrusive, inelegant shapes poking up from the water. But I guess in allowing myself to embrace the chaos of it and just kind of fire them off and cross over one another, it's kind of fun to develop the whole thing in that way and watch it come together. And then from a different image, I added some seagulls, which weren't really in the images of the boats that I was looking at. So I'm looking at seagulls. I am looking at photos of seagulls, but mostly just for the general shape, because these are super gestural kind of rudimentary blobs of birds. But if you don't get like with the beak, if you don't get that slightly downward hook of the tip of the beak, or if you don't capture the sort of protruding breast of the bird, these little things are really what describe a particular bird. So, you wind up with a different bird if you don't get, at least a couple of those simple things. It's a bird, but it's not quite a seagull at a first glance, So this little seagull over here watching the boats, I'm leaving some white space between these elements, again, for the contrast of all the chaos over here with the boats, but also because this separate area with the seagull watching is adding that little bit of storytelling, that relationship, right? So it doesn't have to be much of a story. A lot of times when people talk about storytelling in image making or illustration, a lot of times it can just be that one little simple thing where it's just a simple relationship, like I said, and so this is the relationship of a bird looking at the boats. And just by having a relationship, one thing observing another thing, it evokes, emotion, or you can read emotion into it. And then now I'm just looking for some other areas and opportunities to bring this red back in. I did kind of like having this red just be this one area, but now I'm just feeling like I could bring more balance to it with some other little areas of color. And just being careful to space them out in a nice way. Then I'll bring in some, this cool gray Tombow, like I mentioned, that's just, bringing in a little bit of shading. So I'm kind of just looking for anywhere where there might be a natural shadow underneath an overhanging thing. So like the top of these cabins would have a little bit of a ledge of a lip on them. And then, so I'm just kind of like going right under there, or on some of these structures where you have the horizontal bars across them, I can just put a little bit of a quick shadow underneath those. Not a lot, just a little bit, and then scratch out some shadows, some shading on the sides of the objects and boats. All right, so I think that's about it. Hope everyone has a nice weekend, and as always, thanks for your support here on Patreon, and I'll talk to you soon.